Hello. Welcome back to the iLog channel. My name is Casey, and thank you so much for joining me in this video here where I'm going to be doing a little repair on the used DS Lite that I got off of eBay. This DS Lite had a dead spot in the touchscreen, so I am replacing the digitizer, which is the layer above the bottom screen that actually reads the touch inputs. So I'm not replacing the bottom screen itself, but merely just the capacitive touch layer. Now you're not going to hear any audio from the video in the background itself because I was watching a TV show at the time. So for copyright reasons, it's just going to be voiceover here. But starting off here, I'm just kind of taking all the different screwdriver bits I have out of my electronics screwdriver kit and just seeing which ones fit in the screw holes and which ones don't. That way I'm utilizing the correct ones and picking out other tools like plastic openers and everything. I got this used DS Lite off eBay for like $45, I think. I think it was listed as like $55 or something, but I put in an offer to the seller for $45 and they accepted, which was great. It's a pink DS Lite. I had a DS Lite as a kid. It was the matte black with sort of red or crimson top, but I don't have that anymore. That went, I don't even know what happened to that. It kind of just vanished. I think it ended up in a bin somewhere, and then that bin got, I don't know, sent somewhere. I don't know what happened to my original childhood DS Lite, but that thing had issues. There were issues with the charging port that made it hard to charge. So now that I've picked out the right screwdriver bits, I'm just starting to unscrew things, starting with the battery compartment. And just to take out the battery. It was sticking a little bit. Not sure if the screw... This was a weird one. It was a little unclear whether the screw was out all the way or not. And then there we go. Got it open. Now the battery in this DS Lite seems in good shape. It's holding a charge well enough. The battery does go down a little quicker when I use the flash cart that I have, but that's normal behavior for flash carts. They just drain the battery quicker. With just like a normal game, it seems to hold up just fine. So that's great. And then just checking over to see what screws I needed. I was following I think like an iFixit guide or something on how to open the DS Lite. And a couple of the screws are regular Phillips head screws, and some of them are tri-wing screws. So it's, you're having to swap bits a couple times. And here I'm just peeling off the sort of rubber feet from the bottom that cover up some of the screw holes. I had initially tried using the plastic spreader things to get those out, but I ended up using the metal tweezers from the repair kit. I ended up using a little plastic case that was what my flash cart came in to store all the screws in it. And if I remember correctly, those two screws under the rubber feet were also Phillips head. And yeah, this tri-wing screw in the battery compartment was really deep down in there, and even when it seemed totally unscrewed, it was kind of hard to get out of there. So I had to sort of knock it out into my hands. But then at that point, that was the screw, so I started working on trying to get the rear shell off of the DS Lite. And then here I am, carefully prying up the plastic as to not damage anything, and to make sure that the spring-loaded L&R buttons don't go flying, which is a thing that I heard about when I was doing my research for this, is that you have to be careful with those, because the springs can come out and just kind of go flying across the room, and then you risk losing them. And then when removing this back panel, the volume and power sliders can come out, so you have to be careful to make sure those stay in place. And the next thing I went for was the tweezers, and carefully removing the springs and subsequently the L and R buttons as well. And there's one button removed. And there's the other button removed. And then there's just a couple more screws on the motherboard itself that have to be removed. And now here I'm removing the Wi-Fi card, which is held down. If I remember correctly, there's both kind of an adhesive layer, and then there's also kind of a little slot that it's actually plugging into. And so you just have to be very careful and remove that. And there we go. Got it removed. And then I think I was trying to view whether or not I needed to remove the microphone wire and the actual, there's a wire that connects to the Wi-Fi card to the antenna. And a lot of guides say to remove those, but I think you only really need to if you're actually removing the motherboard completely, or you're doing work that involves getting up to the top screen and disconnecting that. Though by the look of it in the video, I am removing it. I don't quite remember everything I did here. This video was recorded actually quite a few weeks ago, and I'm only just now getting around to recording the audio for it. And then here I'm just getting that last screw on the motherboard. And I was putting all the internal screws, there's one more screw in the motherboard, in the plastic sort of lid of the electronics repair kit. And then here I'm just trying to remove the motherboard itself from the plastic shell carefully. It's tricky because it's basically flush with the plastic, and so it's hard to pull the motherboard out and not just be opening the top screen. And then there we go. I got it. And the tricky thing is the motherboard sits directly above the buttons and the D-pad. So you have to be careful to make sure that those don't fall off or get lost. And if I remember correctly here, I think some of the rubber pad for the buttons actually ended up stuck to the motherboard, so I was debating whether or not to remove it. And then here I'm just flipping up the little plastic tab above the that connects the bottom screen ribbon cable to the motherboard. Oh, I just realized, it's hard to see in the video. The thing I was doing earlier, I wasn't removing the microphone wire. That was me undoing the ribbon cable for the digitizer, which has a thin little ribbon cable that goes to that side of the motherboard. That makes sense. And that's the entire bottom screen with digitizer unit out of the DS. And then I'm just moving the DS Lite out of the way so I can start work on removing the digitizer, which is adhered to the bottom screen. And so you just carefully have to remove that. Here I'm using the plastic prior thing. And I'm also grabbing the new digitizer, which I got off of eBay. I'll leave a link to the listing that I bought it from, because it was really well packaged, and it was good quality, and it functioned and everything. So I want to leave a link to that seller's listing of this in case you also need a DS Lite digitizer, just because I had a good experience ordering this one. So yeah, so I feel comfortable promoting them. And there was just a little bit of taped on cardboard protecting the ribbon cable. And there I've gotten the cardboard off and freed the ribbon cable, and I'm just observing it to see what orientation it needs to go on, and making sure I have the correct side up. Now the tricky part here was peeling up the digitizer without peeling up front layer of it. There's sort of two components on the digitizer. There's the digitizer itself, which goes above the screen, and then there is a sort of protective plastic layer that has a little colored plastic trim that matches the color of the DS. And so the tricky bit was getting the digitizer up without getting without peeling up the protective layer. And it's also tricky because the plastic colored sort of edge that's on top of the protective plastic layer also comes up very easily. So it's you'll see that later in the video. I'm trying very hard to remove the plastic layer and the colored edge at the same time. But here I'm just fitting in the touchscreen or the digitizer just to make sure it fits right and make sure the orientation is correct. And I'm using the plastic shell of the DS Lite to properly align the digitizer and the touchscreen together. That way they are lined up correctly. And here I'm just peeling off the plastic so that I can adhere the digitizer to the touchscreen or to the bottom screen. Now I had quite a bit of trouble actually adhering the digitizer to the touchscreen. There was an extra little bit of protective plastic that was also covering the adhesive, which I hadn't realized. So it was, I spent a lot of time trying to adhere it when it wasn't going to adhere. And here's where I realized there was an extra little bit of plastic on top of the adhesive, preventing it from being accessible. And I'm peeling it off there. Mind you, this was underneath another layer of plastic that was protecting the central screen part of the digitizer. So if you're doing this repair, that's something to keep out, be on the look for, is that you have to be making sure you're getting all the plastic off before you try connecting this. And here I've actually removed the digitizer because I got the orientation wrong. And so now I've fixed the orientation of the screen, and I'm just reattaching the digitizer. And I'm once again taking the digitizer off to fix the alignment again. This was a difficult process, making sure everything was lined up correctly. It really took a lot of time to make sure things were getting set right. Using the shell, though, of the DS Lite and being able to place the screen in the bottom screen hole helped make sure things were getting aligned. So that was good. And here I'm just getting the ribbon cables back in. They are quite finicky to get back in. Not only getting them inserted into the plastic housing, but also flipping the little tab back down is quite tricky, all while trying to make sure you're not damaging the very thin ribbon cable, which, so yeah, that's something to look out for. If you're doing this kind of work yourself, be careful with those ribbon cables because they can get damaged. Luckily, mine weren't damaged in this process, but they can be easily damaged. And now I'm trying to flip the motherboard back over, which is very tricky because the bottom screen is just sort of hanging off. It doesn't adhere in any way, so it can be quite tricky to make sure it sits right. And then I'm just getting that little teeny tiny digitizer ribbon cable, trying to put it back where it was. It is a very, very small ribbon cable, so it's very hard to maneuver it and get it correctly in the slot. And there we go. I got the ribbon cable back in. And then I'm just reattaching the Wi-Fi chip. And this is where I made a bit of a mistake. I went to go to try to put the rear shell back on to test everything. and did not screw the motherboard back in, so it kind of shifted out while I was trying to do that. And I ended up displacing the face buttons there, so I had to realign those. Luckily, putting them back in was really easy. There's sort of these little tabs around each button, and they're in different orientations and different amounts on each button. So each button can only go in its specific slot in a specific, in the correct orientation. So that was really great, which made that whole process a lot easier. So I'm just correcting the previous mistake by screwing the motherboard screws back in so that I can try putting the rear shell back on without the motherboard falling off. Now you'll notice I didn't put the shoulder buttons back on. That's because this was just a preliminary test to make sure the digitizer functioned. So I didn't need the shoulder buttons on because this wasn't the final reassembly. I'm just going to stick the battery back in just so I can make sure that the digitizer works as intended. And the system turned back on, which was good. Of course, I had to go through the system setup again, because when the battery gets taken out, it loses all memory of DS user, and the color setting and birthday setting, the date and time setting all gets reset. So you have to go through all that each time you take out the battery. So I did that quite a few times in this process, as we'll see later. And so now I'm just going into the settings to do a calibration test. And I'm trying to make sure I do it right. Me and my shaky hands. And everything worked. And then I turned the system back on to check into PictoChat, which I did because the dead spot on the screen caused the stylus to sort of jump over certain points. And so the drawing portion of PictoChat was a great way to check and see if that dead spot was still present, which it wasn't, which meant the new digitizer worked and that the dead spot problem was with the old digitizer. Though it was during this test that I noticed that the screen felt weird to use with the stylus, because at this point I hadn't taken the plastic screen protector off of the original digitizer, so it was just this bare, very matte finish, which the original seller had listed on eBay. They mentioned that like these digitizers have a more matte finish than the original ones. And between that and videos I've seen on YouTube of people repairing these and not taking off the plastic screen protector and transferring that over, I think a lot of people just don't do that when they repair this, and so they just think that these new digitizers have a different finish. The finish on them comes from that plastic screen protector. You could probably get away with not putting it back on, but if you can salvage the original one from your DS Lite, if you're doing this repair yourself, I'd recommend it because the screen feels so much better. The stylus moves across much more cleanly and smoothly. Whereas, and there the volume or power slider, one of the two just fell out there. But the stylus moves much more smoothly. When it's the matte finish without the screen protector, it's just like rubbing. It's like plastic on plastic, scratchy. It doesn't feel good, and it also makes it like harder to do things because it doesn't flow as easily. It kind of gets like stuck a little bit. So yeah, I suppose if you were using your fingers instead of a stylus, that would be fine. But I feel like the stylus is necessary for some games that fingers just can't do on the DS. And so there, I've just peeled off the screen protector off of the original digitizer. I had initially tried only peeling off the pink plastic border until I realized that it's actually better to take the whole thing with it. And that's what I'd figured out after the feeling how rough the finish was on the new digitizer. And so I've taken the whole protective plastic layer. Now, my original thought was that I could just stick it on there with the screen in place in the shell, but then I realized I couldn't do that because the digitizer was larger than that. Or rather, the screen protector was larger than the hole in the shell for the digitizer. And then here I just grabbed a little cloth to wipe off the digitizer before I went and covered it with plastic. Right, so I tried to fit it, and I thought I could fit. There was a little plastic extra length, an extra length of plastic that I thought I could slide in there just right, but it wasn't working. There wasn't enough clearance. So that's when I realized I had to take everything apart again. So here I am going through the whole process again, unscrewing the motherboard. I didn't take out the ribbon cables this time, since the screen was already in place and the digitizer was correctly aligned. I didn't feel the need to worry about removing those. And so this first attempt, I just stuck the plastic screen protector just under the digitizer and then put the motherboard screws back in, hoping that it would just kind of fall into the right alignment because of the pink border. The way it is raised above the screen protector. So to describe this best I can, it's two layers, right? You have the plastic screen protector and then the pink edging, as I mentioned earlier. And so I was hoping that the pink edging would just fall neatly into the hole in the shell, which you can see very clearly in this clip. It did not. If you notice there, it was very much off center. And I would proceed to spend many tries getting this right. And I'll say, if you're doing your own DS Lite repair, I don't know if I'll include every single riveting second of me taking these screws out, trying to refit the screen protector, putting the screws back in, having it not seating right, doing that just over and over and over again, try after try after try. I won't include every second of that, though it's riveting content, I know. But I'm going to cut that down. But I did end up getting it after a while. It just took so many tries. So many tries. And then finally, I got it in correctly. And so here I am reinstalling the shoulder buttons. Starting by sticking the little peg. There's a small hole in there that the peg can go into. And then also trying to carefully bend the spring into the sort of little tongs that it has to go into, which went pretty smoothly. I have to say, though, the way these shoulder buttons were constructed really impressed me. The only other DS or even like Nintendo device I've opened up was a new 2DS XL, and because the D-pad was starting to malfunction, and I thought maybe I could clean up the pads underneath. So I tried to start disassembling that. Way harder to disassemble that than a DS Lite. The DS Lite is a much more simple stuff going on inside and much easier to disassemble. But I ended up damaging one of the shoulder buttons. Luckily, it was just like one of the ZL or ZR, like the smaller ones that you don't necessarily need when putting together. But the button actually broke off, which I've seen a bunch of other videos of like 2DS XL repairs, and it seems like a really common issue where the shoulder buttons inside the console actually break off and take the solder pads with them, which is what happened to me on this. So I've got a DS Lite, a 2DS XL that just has a non-functional, I think it's like the ZL button. So, but yeah, the DS Lite, super sturdy, honestly. I know the hinge can be kind of weak and the hinge can get damaged over time, but I mean, the actual internals, like taking it apart and reassembling and disassembling it, things built really well. And here I was having to readjust the volume sliders. This is one thing worth noting when you're taking apart and putting the rear shell back on. You have to be really careful about making sure the power and volume sliders are aligned properly. And it can be kind of tricky because they can fall out. But a good trick is to make sure the power slider is in the position that it naturally wants to spring back to when it's after you've already activated it. And then setting the volume slider either all the way up or all the way down, just so you have that like hard limit of like, here's where it's going to go and line up with the actual switch inside the DS. But then after getting that aligned, I tested out the sliders to make sure they were aligned and working as they were supposed to. And then started getting the screws back in. Of course, a thumbs up before I start getting the screws back in. Perhaps a naive thumbs up. yeah, little did I know how truly, truly naive I was then, because I would end up having to take apart and reassemble this again after there was a slight, I noticed like a misalignment thing with the plastic shell that I hadn't noticed before, and so I don't know if it was there before, but I ended up spending quite a lot of time trying to fix that. And then here, before I've gotten all of the screws in, I've just turned the system on to go through the setup one more time. And this time I did the actual real setup, setting the time correctly and everything. And so here I'm just going to a website to check what the time is. It gives you the time down to like the second and the very exact time. So I use that whenever I have to set my watch or a device like this. And then after setting the system up, I went back to the touchscreen calibration just to make sure that everything had maintained calibration after putting on the plastic screen. I didn't know if that would affect how the touchscreen worked at all, so I'm trying to make sure to get it very, very exact on each point so that the touchscreen is calibrated as accurately as possible. So I'm very, very intently focused, as you can see, on hitting those little squares on the screen as exactly as I can. And yeah, the touchscreen still worked after putting the plastic screen protector on, and it felt much better. It felt like how a DS Lite usually feels, where you can move the stylus across the screen, and it's a very smooth motion. I gotta say, navigating through the DS Lite menus, it really is such a fascinating UI design. It's got this really charming look to it that's very pixelated and very like computery, but also friendly and like, you know, it's I guess it's toyish, right? The DS Lite, it's very much like built like a serious handheld, but also like a toy. And it's serious in the sense that, you know, you look at it and it's got like a calendar and a clock built in, things that, you know, a kid might not need. But the UI is very friendly and inviting, which, you know, and of course there's things you can change the color of the border to your system. I think when I got this off of eBay, it had a purple border, and the name in the system was like Violet or something. So Violet, thank you for selling your DS Lite on eBay. Or if that was a child and their parent sold it, I'm sorry to say, Violet, but I think your parent sold your DS Lite on eBay. But yeah, obviously I've since had to reset the console by taking the battery out for these repairs. So even though I changed the name of the system when I first got it, it's long, all those traces are gone. It's not a system you can very much leave a mark on, because you can't, it's not like a DSi or a 3DS where you can download software to it and save images to it and all this like very personal stuff. It's very much like, oh yeah, you put your name and a favorite color and your birthday in, and then anyone can just go in and change that later. And if you take out the battery especially, all that gets reset. So it's a very, you know, it's a very personal console in the sense that you can take it with you and that you get those kinds of features to make it yours, but they don't necessarily stay with the console forever the way that images might save on an SD card on a DSi or a 3DS. But yeah, the funness in the design of the DS UI is more than can be said for some other consoles. The Switch. And even just more color options. Like, I don't know. I'm hoping at some point, I know there's there's always talk of the next Nintendo console and it being kind of a Switch successor. At the time of making this video, there has been no such official announcement from Nintendo, but I'm hoping before that gets released or announced, I'd like to see at some point the Switch get the ability to select at least like a color theme, even if it's not detailed themes with like images and stuff, just like something more than just either light or dark theme. Maybe like just different colors. Blues, reds, pinks, oranges, purples, just all that stuff. It'd make the system, I think, a little more fun, But it's also, stylistic tendencies have changed since the early 2000s. And that's okay, I did end up keeping the old digitizer because I don't like getting rid of things. Even if it's probably a good idea at times. Because you just never know when you might need a dysfunctional DS Lite digitizer, right? Totally. I guess I didn't record me taking apart and reassembling the system later, but if I remember correctly, after recording then, I did end up disassembling and reassembling it a couple more times just to try to align the plastic misalignment at the back. I didn't end up fixing it. I think it's just part of the system. And as I'm packing up my tools here, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I know this is kind of a strange video, part guide, part just kind of like a chill talking video, But I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, leave a like, helps out the channel. And if you want to see more videos, and potentially even more videos like this, click that subscribe button. I have some other stuff on this channel. I have some music videos, song covers, a Minecraft survival Let's Play that you can watch. Lots of stuff here. Try to keep a good variety of things and of all my different interests and stuff, and try to collect that all here on this channel. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Oh, I think actually past Casey has an outro to say.
Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. DS Lite's working great now. Hello. Hi. Bye now.
Yes, thank you, Casey. Bye now. Bye now, indeed.